Hey Reefers, welcome back. Okay, so today we're going to touch on a topic that is sensitive to everyone. It's algae control. Okay, so basically I get asked a lot, how do I get rid of a certain algae, or what chemical can I use to remove the algae? But what we're going to look at first, before we even look at what we can add to our aquarium to help remove the pest algae that we're dealing with at the time, is actual algae control. So this is monitoring our nitrates and phosphates. Now, nitrates and phosphates are a food source for your algae to grow. Without phosphates and nitrates, it is difficult for the algae to grow, or keeping your phosphates and nitrates at a traceable level, enough for your corals to grow, to provide a food source for the zooxanthellae that live in the coral, and that's a food source, therefore, for the coral. So obviously we don't want to get our systems to absolutely zero, but we want to have trace amounts. Like my personal range I like to keep my phosphates and nitrates at, I like to keep my nitrates, it's a wide range, higher than 1, lower than 10. So if I'm inside that sort of range, I'm happy. And it tends to keep my algae at bay. So with my phosphates, it's a lot lower, obviously, not lower than 0.01 and not higher than 0.1. And that seems to be a happy medium for me, and it works in my aquarium, keeps the pest algae at bay. But at low levels of nitrates and phosphates, you can still experience algae growth for a number of factors. Okay, and at first being lighting. A lot of direct sunlight will help that algae to grow in lower nutrients, a lower nutrient system. When I say burnt out T5s, T5 lighting, burnt out T5s meaning T5s that have run their course and are overdue for changing. Their color spectrum does change over time, and they can also promote pest algae from growing. There's, like I said, there's a lot of factors that come into it. And you can also get what I like to call a false low reading. If you've got a lot of pest algae, like especially hair algae, and it's growing to extreme lengths. I mean, hair algae, I've seen it in cases where the actual strands are 150 mils. That's 15 centimeters long, waving off the rocks, looking like a grass field in a strong gale force wind. And that can show when you test that your nitrates and phosphates are low, because that algae grows at an alarming rate, and it will reduce the nitrates and phosphates in the aquarium and absorb them as the aquarium is producing them. So when you come to testing, you'll test and go, oh, well, why do I have this? My nitrates and phosphates are in a decent range. Why am I dealing with this pest algae? And that's purely because the algae itself is using up the nitrates and phosphates before it's actually entering the water column for testing. So when you are dealing with an issue like that, your best thing to do is manually remove it, okay? And you can tell healthy hair algae. For example, we're going to go into hair algae in this topic, because hair algae is one of the ones that can give you a false low reading. And if you grab that tuft of hair and you pull it, and you can actually feel the fibers of that hair algae breaking, like you can hear them, feel them, like almost feeling when you pull that hair algae away from the rock, that means that algae is healthy and it's getting a good dose of nutrients. Okay, so your phosphates and nitrates are truly a lot higher than what your test is showing you. Okay, so when you get in there and you manually remove it, give yourself, like I said, this stuff grows back quickly if there is enough food for it. Give yourself a day or two and then test again and see what happens with your nitrates and phosphates. Most cases you'll see a rise. It might not be enough of a rise because the hair algae is still in the aquarium and it's still growing, so it's still absorbing the nitrates and phosphates. So where we're going to go to battle this, to combat this situation, is not going for the chemical straight away. The chemical is a solution, but it's not a solution to the problem. It'll just be the solution to the algae. It'll break the algae down. We need to find out why our nitrates and phosphates are a problem in this aquarium. Once we discover that phosphates and nitrates are an issue and we need to bring them down, we need to first combat why they are high. Now, there's a few factors that could be playing in this role, and the biggest one is bioload. You might think, I'm sticking to the rule of thumb of how many fish I can keep, so I'm not overstocking my aquarium, so how can it be a bioload issue? A bioload, like explained before, is if I have 10 fish in tank A and 10 fish in tank B, and that is staying within not overloading the aquarium. In tank A, if I'm feeding a proper feeding schedule and not overfeeding the fish, that bioload would be different to tank B, where I was feeding the fish at will whenever I thought, oh look, my fish look hungry and they're sitting at the glass, they want food. That tank's going to be suffering from nutrient problems. You have to remember, in an aquarium, especially an established aquarium, feeding your fish is very important, don't get me wrong. You need to feed your fish, and you need to feed your fish a nice balanced diet. But in an established aquarium, there's so much natural food inside there. I mean, there's copepods, amphipods, isopods, there's forms of algae that grow on your rock that film algae. My yellow tang in my aquarium is constantly picking at the rocks. My mandarin, I've had now for, I think it's coming on 2 years now, has never taken food as mandarins do. They live on natural food only. Some do tend to take. Mine is just too slow. It never gets to food in time. When it does see a piece of food, it looks at it like it's a foreign object, and he's sussing it out. By the time he's realized it's food, it's too late. Another fish has swam past it, eaten it. So there are natural foods in your aquarium. So feeding a nice balanced diet and not too much food. You don't want to be feeding your fish and the food's falling to the floor and not being eaten. Yes, there's cleanup crew and stuff that would eat it, but it's unnecessary food, Yes, that's what your cleanup crew is there for, but what I'm talking about is large amounts of uneaten food. That's going to just waste away and cause nitrates and phosphates to start rising in your aquarium. So the best thing for algae control is your nitrates and phosphate nutrient control and keeping those under control. Now, for example, in my aquarium now, in the display tank in our shop, I've had a little bit of hair algae growing on the one side glass. Now, nitrates and phosphates in that aquarium have always been low. And I was thinking to myself, well, why? Why am I getting this hair algae now? It's not like I had a sudden raise in nitrates and phosphates and it's caused the hair algae to grow. And it dawned on me that, okay, when I did a video in the shop the one morning, I changed the settings on my lights. Okay, so normally I run my lights for 12 to 13, I think it's 13 hours a day. But it's 3.5 hours in the morning where it will ramp up from a UV all the way through to a blue, and then 6 hours during the afternoon where I have my full light cycle, and then another 3.5 hours ramping down for the sunset sort of setting. Now, I had set that light back an extra 3 hours with the main lights. So instead of running my usual 6 hours a day, I was running 9 hours a day at full power lighting for that aquarium. And since I noticed the hair algae, I was thinking to myself, but hold on, every time I open up the shop, the main lights are on already. So I went onto the app of the settings for the lights, and I saw, oh shoot, my lights are coming on 3 hours earlier. Well, my main lights are coming on 3 hours earlier than they were meant to. So I was getting a 9-hour cycle of light. And since I've gone back to my original settings, the hair algae is starting to dissipate and disappear. And not like it went out of control, but it was too much light. Now, this comes to the side of the topic where you're feeding your tank too much light or the wrong light, like sunlight through a window. That can cause hair algae to grow as well. So once you find what's causing it, then start looking at a method to try and help with your biological system. Like there's many products on the market. You guys all know I'm an Aquaforest fanboy. I dose BioS, ProBioS, NP Pro, and Nitrophos minus, and I keep phosphate minus on guard if I need it. I don't run it continuously, For the last 6 months now, my nitrates have never gone over 0.07. And like I said, it's staying within inside my range, so there's no need to play with it. Okay, so there are many different types of pest algae out there. Now, one of them is Cyanobacteria. Okay, these are the two that I'm going to touch on today. Cyanobacteria, yes, it's a painful red slime algae. It doesn't look nice in the aquarium, and that is one of the toughest ones to determine what the issue is. It can grow in almost zero nitrates and phosphates I've had experience with in my aquarium, but one of the things that can cause it is, especially if you're dosing an amino mix of some sort and you're overdosing it. If that is the case, tap back on your dosing of your aminos, stop it for a week and see if that is the issue. If it is the issue, go back on your dosing. The best thing to do when you're dosing things like aminos and the Vitality or the AB, what's it, AB plus, any of those brands that do amino mix, fuel, always start with a quarter dose and slowly add to that. So when I mean slowly, I mean you'll start at your quarter dose, whatever it is to your aquarium, cut it in 4, and that's what you start with. You'll do that for about a week to 2 weeks. Make it 2 weeks or a little bit longer if you can. And one telltale sign on overdosing on aminos is a film algae that grows on your front glass. If you're cleaning your glass every 4 days or so, that's pretty average on that film algae. If you find you're dosing the aminos and that starts becoming more regularly cleaning the glass, it means you're adding in too much aminos to your aquarium. So step back from the point where your glass started getting dirty too quickly. And as your tank matures and gets older and you add more corals, you can start playing with it again, but use that as a telltale. Let that tell you that, listen, I'm adding in too much aminos. There's no test kit out there other than RCP testing to tell us that we're adding too much of a certain chemical. And you're not doing RCP tests. If you are doing an RCP test, you're not doing them on a weekly basis. You're doing them every 6 months to once a year, especially if you don't have an RCP test center in your country and you have to export your sample. It gets costly. So not everyone has access to RCP testing. So that one thing you can use your tank to tell you when you are adding in too much. If you're having a big outbreak of cyanobacteria, first thing to look at is, what are you topping up your aquarium with? Tap water? Then you're going to have an issue. It's not everyone that has this case, but a lot of the time I see a guy who's having a problem with cyanobacteria, and the first question is, what are you topping up your aquarium with for evaporation? And then they'll say tap water. Or I'm using RO water, and I ask them, please go check your TDS on your RO unit, and they come back with a TDS reading of 90, which is, in our little town here in Durban, it's almost what comes out of the tap. I think ours is averaging between 100 and 120 TDS, and if your RO machine's making 80 TDS, you might as well just use the tap water. It's not going to make that much of a difference. So if you're using RO water and you're still having cyano problems and your TDS is in a reasonable range, under 10 TDS is acceptable. The lower the better, but 10 is good. I mean, it's usable and it shouldn't give you issues. If you're still having cyano there and you can't figure it out and you've tried multiple things, checking your feeding, lighting as well, like burnt out T5s can promote it, and you're still having an issue, there is a product called ChemiClean. Now, I've always said, always find the problem first and then treat it, but sometimes ChemiClean removes the problem as the cause, not just the problem. So I do think ChemiClean is an awesome product for that. Just follow the instructions on the box, and 9 times out of 10 it solves the problem and it cures the problem. If you find that it's not curing the problem and you use ChemiClean and in 2 weeks time or a week's time your cyanobacteria is back in full force, then unfortunately you have to hit the grindstone, maybe do a couple of bigger water changes. The saying, dilution is the best solution. If you keep up with your maintenance and do some form of algae control, most of these things are avoidable. Now, so just bear in mind your first 12 months of reefing are going to be the hardest 12 months of reefing, as you probably are going to experience every type of algae or pest algae that you get in your aquarium. You know, like a lot of guys like the calcareous algae to start growing, because that's a good algae that you want to grow in your aquarium. Yes, it's good in the fact that it covers your rocks. Any area that is covered with calcareous algae, healthy calcareous algae, will not allow a bad or a pest algae to start growing over it. My only con with calcareous algae is that it is very hungry for KH. Guys, if there are any other questions about hair algae or cyanobacteria or just algae control in general, hit me up in the comments. I'll try and help out anyone I can. I mean, this is the purpose of this channel, is to help you guys out as much as I can, pass a bit of my experience on, and also learn from you guys. See you in the next episode, guys. Happy reefing.